El Paso, Texas, USA. Population 600,000. Immediately to the south, Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua, Mexico. With 1.5 million people, separated by nothing more than a shallow river, they're the largest and most closely tied twin cities in the U.S.-Mexico border. For years, people from both countries have been crossing back and forth between Juárez and El Paso to shop, do business, and visit friends and family. For generations, it's been the job of the U.S. Border Patrol to arrest those making the trip north illegally. As this country's only federal police force, Border Patrol agents have a tremendous responsibility and tremendous enforcement power. But sometimes, in fact, all too often, according to many local residents, that power has been used irresponsibly, even unlawfully.
Entonces yo llegué a ver varios abusos de inmigración en mis compañeros, sí, en mí misma.
This woman has asked us to call her Maria. She lives in this Juárez neighborhood, a neighborhood whose poverty is typical of conditions suffered by hundreds of thousands of other residents on the Mexican side of the border. Most people in Maria's neighborhood make the Mexican minimum wage, less than $4 a day. Even one person would have a hard time trying to survive on so little, but Maria was struggling to support 5 children after her husband abandoned her years ago. She was desperate for work, and she knew there were jobs across the river that paid even uneducated women like her 7 or 8 times what she could earn in Juárez. But because Maria was poor, she was unable to get a permit to hold a job in El Paso or even enter the city. Like thousands of other poor Juarenses, she crossed anyway, illegally. For 14 years, she spent several days a week in this El Paso neighborhood caring for an elderly couple. During that time, Maria saw other illegal crossers beaten by Border Patrol agents. One day, it happened to her.
Una parte que le dicen el túnel, entramos mucha gente, o sea, íbamos bastante gente, entre ellos íbamos yo y mi hermano.
We were crossing into El Paso through a tunnel. There were about 8 people, including my sister. The agent who caught me thought I was trying to run away, so he hit me with his nightstick. When I came to, my sister was there, and she was very angry. You shouldn't have hit her, she said to the agent. Shut up, they told her. And they took us downtown to the county jail. Why are you doing this to us, I asked. Because we don't want this getting into the press, the supervisor said. My sister had a newborn at home and she was nursing, and her breast started leaking milk, and the Border Patrol had to let her go. But they kept me. I'd never been in a jail before. It was horrible. They made me take off all my clothes and spread my legs. They examined my private parts and disinfected them. They kept me 2 days, and when they let me go, I was so depressed I almost fainted.
Maria is still so fearful of the Border Patrol that she's afraid to use her real name when she tells her story.
Varios tiempo que oía yo las rejas de la cárcel cuando se abría cualquier
but even now I still can't forget this trauma. For a long time, any little noise reminded me of the sound of the bars of a jail cell. My nerves were shot.
Se agarró como a las 6 de la tarde y soltó hasta otro día y sin comer.
This woman also has stories of abuse. Several times, she and her children have been apprehended in El Paso by Border Patrol agents, then held at their downtown detention facility for as long as 18 hours without food. Susan Kern is coordinator of the Border Rights Coalition of El Paso and Juárez. It's a group of volunteers who organized in the 1980s to promote human and civil rights for immigrants and to stop abuse by law enforcement authorities, including the Border Patrol.
Over the last 10 years or so that we've been documenting abuses by Border Patrol agents here on the border in El Paso and Juárez, we've recorded a number of different kinds of abuses against the undocumented, and those include beatings and excessive use of force, sexual harassment and sexual abuse, verbal abuse, including racial insults and ethnic insults, inhumane detention conditions, unsafe transportation, including transporting over at high speeds over unsafe roads and in overheated vehicles, threatening to hurt people or rape them or retaliate against them in some way if they report abuse, and even injuries and deaths resulting from shooting.
Undocumented residents of Mexico were not the only people who had problems. El Pasoans, too, were subjected to misconduct by agents, especially when they lived near the border and when they looked Hispanic. This is El Paso's second ward, El Segundo Barrio as it's called in Spanish. One of the oldest and southernmost neighborhoods in the city, El Segundo Barrio was a haven for refugees fleeing the violence of the Mexican Revolution early in this century. 3 generations later, it's still a harbor for Mexican immigrants, a first stop on the road of hopes and dreams they follow to the United States. There has always been extreme hardship in El Segundo Barrio, but there has been joy and community too. Unfortunately, there has also been grave injustice.
You would have had to be blind in the barrio, in El Segundo Barrio, in order not to have seen or witnessed the horrible things that went on.
Amparo Wu's family immigrated to South El Paso from Mexico in the late 1950s. She was in grade school then. Once, when she was walking near her house, she saw a beggar boy who was not much older than she was. He had just been picked up by a border patrolman, and Amparo would never forget what she saw the agent do to the child.
He was beating up on him so very badly, and you couldn't even tell the boy's face because it was already so very swollen. I remember my cousin and I got close and said, "Why are you doing that?" And he turned around and said very, very ugly words and said, bottom line was, you shut up or you're going to get exactly the same thing. We went home and I told my mother, and she said, well, that's the reason you shouldn't be out at night. Things like that could happen to you.
I was detained several times.
Grace Hernandez grew up not far from where Amparo lived. She too remembers abuse, not just seeing it, but experiencing it herself.
On the north side of Paisano Street, and we'd have to go through the railroads, okay, and we'd have to jump them. And some of the incidents that I came across with Border Patrol is they were always there in the morning because they knew we had to jump the trains, and that's when they would stop and questions when they knew that people, you know, weren't around to watch. But there were some that were like, not saying sexually harassing us, but they were there to watch us as girls, you know, jump the trains. And that I disliked all the time. And I complained, and I would tell my mom, but my mom would say, you know, I've always told you, don't say anything about Border Patrol. I guess parents in this area thought that if you ever complained about Border Patrol, that they would be taken back to Mexico, or they would be deported. I mean, Border Patrol, don't mention their name because you get in trouble. Our parents are often...
Like Grace, Amparo experienced abuse as a teenager. Once, she was on her way to a party with several friends. They were stopped by the Border Patrol.
He pushed us all against the wall in spite of the fact that we were dressed to go to a party, okay? It was a very ugly experience. He kept on talking Spanish, a very broken Spanish. And I did turn around and I answered in English. And he said, where did you learn your English? And I said, I am a student at Bowie High School, sir. And he started saying bad words. I remember Olga Moncada started crying. I didn't know why it is that she was crying. Evidently, in talking later on, she had had another experience with Border Patrol, again, very close to 13th Street. And she was touched. and she thought that the same thing was going to happen. But this time she had her two brothers. Her two brothers were there with us, and both boys were very passive. Fact is, I was the only one who talked. When they did ask the boys questions, their English was very, very bad. And he scared them, he threw them in the truck, and he had us out there. The girls, 4 girls were out there, and one of them was crying. The neighbors heard, but none of them would go over and say, leave them alone, don't you have proof? They speak the language, leave them alone. Nobody said anything. You could just see the curtains and the faces, and they closed the curtain immediately. Well, they let us go. But what an experience. I got home and I told my mother, and she said, well, honey, there's nothing that anybody can do.
Amparo's brother fared even worse. He was a naturalized U.S. citizen, spoke excellent English, and was a high school senior in El Paso. But once, he was detained by Border Patrol agents. They accused him of being an illegal alien, and they falsely deported him to Caseta, an isolated Mexican town some 40 miles downriver from El Paso and Juarez.
And they took my brother there. It took him a couple of days to get back to El Paso. When he got back to Ciudad Juarez, he called my mother and told her what had happened. And my mother was very, very worried. She'd go to church, she'd pray the rosary. And then he called, told my mother what had happened. And again, she just took it. She said that that's the way it was, that was the law, and that we needed to abide by those particular rules. I saw my mom suffer an awful lot. My brother's clothing was very dirty. It was sometime during the summer, very dirty. I remember we went to Juarez to pick him up. He didn't have any shoes because he had to sell them to take the bus back to Ciudad Juarez.
Amparo and Grace grew up, continued their education, and moved to more affluent neighborhoods in other parts of El Paso. But in South El Paso, a new generation continued to experience Border Patrol abuse.
It wasn't safe to be outside. I mean, you were always looking after, over your shoulder, just making sure that, you wouldn't get stopped.
Mario Tapia was raised in this part of South El Paso, an area called Piedras Alameda.
One of my friends and I were talking on the phone at a nearby Chevron gasoline station. There's a lot of bars on Alameda Street, that's where I live. There are a lot of bars. You would see a lot of vendors, that sell roses and a whole bunch of little stuff. And what happened one time was that I saw a vendor running. And like a couple of seconds later, I saw that Border Patrol, Suburban, was going towards him, and the Border Patrol agents just cut him off, got off, and they just started beating him up. The man was saying something to him, in Spanish. He was saying, please just take me in. So, they would just keep on hitting him. What my friend did was he got off the phone and he just went up to him and told him, you know what, he hasn't done anything, just take him in, why do you have to beat him up? But the thing that happened was that one of the Border Patrol agents turned around and just whacked my friend with the club. And astounded, I went, kind of confused, wondering what had happened, and I as well got hit. They hit him, just on his back, wherever they could hit him. They practically they hit him bad. And then when it came up to me, they whacked me a couple of times, on the head, stomach, the back, and the leg. That was it. But it was sad because they did stick out the gun. They pointed the gun at my friend, and they told him to get up. and they took him in along with the undocumented person.
Again, the bystanders who witnessed these beatings shrugged. And again, a mother said not to complain. You can't beat the government, she told Mario. But things were about to change in South El Paso at an institution with a long history of pride and activism. This is Bowie High School today. This is the original campus dating back to the 1930s. Like the South El Paso community that sends its students year after year, Bowie has a venerable history. Long an educational mecca for the children, like Mario Tapia, of Mexican immigrants, it's a high school with a dedicated staff, many of whom themselves graduated from Bowie, then came back to work here, like Amparo Wu, currently Bowie's vice principal after serving many years as a student counselor, and Grace Hernandez, secretary to the principal. Bowie is a high school with two proud traditions. Both contribute to its spirit. And in 1992, both inspired Bowie students and staff to finally do something about Border Patrol abuse. Abuse that had even permeated the school's campus. In the early 1990s, Bowie got a new principal, Paul Strelson. He hadn't been at Bowie long before he started hearing and seeing disturbing things on his campus.
I heard about students being stopped on campus. I heard about agents who actually were in classrooms who were pretending to be students. I heard about vans from the Border Patrol that were driving on my campus, knocking out my watering system and just tearing up the grass. I myself saw agents who were parked in my parking lot using binoculars, looking at my flag girls at 6:30 in the morning and telling me personally that they had their eye on a white car for a possible drug deal, but there was no white car. I heard about students who were grabbed, accosted. I heard about teachers who were followed and clerks who were followed home. I heard about some teachers and some coaches who actually had weapons placed in their heads. So as it came all to a point, I was totally amazed that this was happening at Bowie High School or any place in the United States at the time.
Students and staff members tried to confront the Border Patrol about their presence on campus, but they were met with the same response. Grace Hernandez is Principal Strelson's secretary.
And all of a sudden I saw this Border Patrol van going across the field where the band practices, and the kids were still around. And it made me mad because they were coming at a very high rate of speed. And my car and their van, you know, we came upon each other at the same time. And I just looked at them and I said, you people are not going to be happy until you kill one of our students. And real ugly, one of them just turned and said, and who are you to tell us anything?
Even Hernandez was harassed. Once, while returning home from work, she was stopped by Border Patrol agents who said she had drugs in her car. There were no drugs, and Hernandez was released without too much inconvenience. A Bowie football coach was not so lucky.
I turned and immediately saw that there was a gun pointed to the back of my head with arms extended. An agent had drawn his .357 Magnum, I believe is what it was.
It was a Saturday morning in September 1991. Bowie was about to play its last junior varsity game of the season. Football coach Ben Murillo was driving two varsity players to watch the game at a neighboring school. They hadn't gotten far from Bowie when a Border Patrol vehicle ordered Coach Murillo to stop.
When I saw the gun, I immediately turned back and I just kind of cringed. I thought, oh, God, you know, I can kiss my butt goodbye, thank you very much. And then nothing happened for a couple seconds, and I gathered my thoughts. I relaxed for a second, and I identified myself. I said, "Sir, my name is Ben Murillo. I'm a coach at Bowie High School. I have two students, two football players from Bowie High School with me, and I'd appreciate it if you'd holster your gun." And the guy snapped back at me, "Well, if I'd appreciate if you'd shut your mouth and get out of the car." And I realized, man, this guy might be dangerous, and I wasn't going to give him 1 inch from this point on. I said, "No, sir." I said, "I'm not getting out of this car until you holster that." And a couple seconds later, the agent says, "Okay, I've holstered my gun, now get out of the car," with this badass attitude. The female agent then proceeded to ask the smaller of the two young men for his ID, and he pulled out his ID, and you could see that she kind of like, oh God, because the ID that Isaac produced was military ID.
The agents apologized. They said they'd gotten a report of illegal activity by someone whose clothing matched one of Murillo's football players. But it would have been impossible for the Border Patrol officials to see the students' clothing. They were too far away.
But I asked him, so this gives you the right to pull a gun on me and to endanger my life? And the guy snapped with that attitude again. "I can do anything I want. It's my job. I'm a federal agent, and I can do anything I want."
Like countless other victims, Ben Murillo didn't think anything could be done. That attitude would soon be challenged, though, in the classroom of Juan Seibert Coronado, a Bowie social studies teacher. Seibert Coronado was also co-sponsor of the school's chapter of MECHA, Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán, a national student group with a history of promoting pride and civil rights among young Mexican Americans. One day in 1991, a student came late to class and told Seibert Coronado he'd been detained by the Border Patrol while he was playing handball on the school grounds.
I began asking more and more of my students their relationship to the Border Patrol, and if they'd ever been stopped by the Border Patrol, and what the Border Patrol had done to them. And as I asked more and more students, what came across very clearly to me was that almost all of my students had at one time or another had a negative encounter with the Border Patrol.
Seibert Coronado invited members of El Paso's Border Rights Coalition to speak to his students about their civil rights when confronted by the Border Patrol.
So we went in, members of the coalition went in several different times and taught constitutional rights. And the kids began to learn what their rights were, including the fact that they had the right not to answer questions, to remain silent. They had the right to walk away unless they were being detained and arrested. They had the right to know why they were being arrested, etc. And the kids began to exercise these rights in the neighborhood.
One of the students, David Renteria, was a Bowie senior. David had suffered Border Patrol harassment in the past. Now he vowed that if it happened again, he would use what he had just learned. Soon he got his chance. It was graduation day in May of 1992.
I saw the truck and I told my friend, they're going to stop us. They're going to stop us. And I already had in my head, they stopped and they asked us for citizenship, and I responded, U.S. citizen. My friend did the same thing, and then they asked us again, what is your citizenship? I said, U.S. citizen. They asked us again, and I said, U.S. citizen. And I looked at my friend and said, you know what, let's go. Kept on walking. And the Border Patrol agent on the passenger side said if we didn't stop, they were going to beat us up real bad to the point that we weren't going to be able to move. Kept on, I just felt like a real cold chill down my back. But I said, no, I'm going to walk. Kept on walking. The agent got off his truck. I felt his hand on my left elbow. He jerked it back. When he jerked it, I turned and faced him. And he started pushing, and he wanted to see some ID. And I told him I don't have any ID. And I would appreciate it if you get your hands off me. And then he started asking me, where were you born? And I looked at him, I've taken the Fifth Amendment. I'm exercising the right to remain silent. And he says, you can't exercise the right to remain silent because I'm not placing you under arrest. And then he says, do you want me to call a police officer? He called it PO. And I said, you could call anybody you want. I'm not having any kind of conversation with you. We had a certificate with the list of all the seniors that graduated that year. And they took my friends, the other agent took it from my friend's hands and he crumpled it up. And I had mine rolled up in my hand, and the agent that was with me asked me for it, and I went, no. And he said, do you want me to take it away from your hand? And I told him, I want to see you try it. And then that's when he said, you know what, I think you have a weapon on you. And he got me and he slammed me against the fence. And he put his left forearm in the back of my neck. And then with an open hand, he started slapping my back, slapping my legs, you know. It wasn't a pat down. I've seen pat downs on TV and I've seen them on the streets. And he kicked my legs. After at the beginning, I forgot when he jerked my arm back, the agent spat on my face and he was eating sunflower seeds because I felt them on my face.
Eventually, David was released. He had copied the agent's name off his badge and had written down the number of the Border Patrol truck as well. David had this information, but he wasn't sure what to do next. He went to see his Bowie counselor.
He said, gosh, Mrs. Wu, what do you think I should do? I said, I think you need to see a lawyer. It's happened too many times to our kids. The time has come.
David contacted the Border Rights Coalition and the San Antonio-based Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. Together, the groups began exploring the possibility of filing a lawsuit against the Border Patrol. They wanted to get its agents off the Bowie campus and forbid them from stopping South El Pasoans simply because they look Hispanic. Meanwhile, Bowie Principal Paul Strelson tried to settle things informally with then El Paso Border Patrol Sector Chief Dale Musgates. He was unsuccessful.
And Chief Musgates came to the office, and he talked, Mr. Strelson talked to him about the incidents, and he questioned, you know, well, why are they here on campus, or what business do they have here on campus? Why can't they go somewhere else? And he called me in at the time, and he said to tell Chief Musgates about my incident when they followed me home. And he said he didn't believe it. You know, right there in front of me, he said, I can't believe this. It can't be true. And then I went back after a while, and I said, you know, Mr. Strelson, mine is really nothing compared to the incident that happened to Coach Murillo when they pulled out a gun on him. And of course, the chief there looked at me, and he said, this lady is crazy. It can't be true. But at that time, Coach Murillo came into the office, and I took him in there, and he told his story too, and they just said they couldn't believe it. They didn't believe any of it.
With the Border Patrol unwilling to admit wrongdoing, the idea of a lawsuit gained popularity during the fall semester of 1992. Students discussed the situation at MECHA meetings and confronted Chief Musgates with their concerns.
Within 25 miles of the border, for the purpose of controlling the border, we have the authority to go on private lands. Now that obviously includes public lands, so we do have that authority.
The students weren't satisfied.
Our rights daily, on a day-to-day course, are being violated by the immigration.
In October, with the help of El Paso attorney Albert Armendariz Jr., the San Antonio lawyers filed a class action suit against the Border Patrol on behalf of Bowie's students and staff. Within a few weeks, the court set December 2nd, 1992 as the day to listen to Bowie's complaints.
Chief Musgates says his agents are only supposed to enter buildings.
They aired their complaints forcefully and stood their ground.
You asked me like 4 times, what's your citizenship,
Federal Judge Lucius Bunton was impressed. He thought the staff and students had valid complaints. Border Patrol agents, he ruled in a preliminary injunction, had repeatedly and illegally stopped, questioned, detained, frisked, arrested, and searched plaintiffs and numerous other students from the Bowie High School district. Agents had also subjected the victims to indecent comments, obscene gestures, and humiliation in the presence of their co-workers, family, friends, and community. The judge noted that people in the Bowie area seemed to be suffering these abuses simply because they looked Hispanic. To prevent further misconduct, while the case progressed to trial, Judge Bunton ordered the Border Patrol to stay off campus and stop detaining and questioning people in the Segundo Barrio area. A year later, the Border Patrol and the Bowie plaintiffs decided to settle the suit without a trial. The Border Patrol agreed that it would no longer stop El Pasoans simply because their skin is brown. The agency also agreed to make it easier to report civil rights abuses by posting phone numbers and other information about how to make complaints. It was a victory for Bowie.
We saw our students do something very few other students have ever done. And it really was the students that did it. They took control of the government. They didn't just sit by as passive subjects of the government. They made the government responsive to their needs in a constitutional and legal way.
Things did improve in South El Paso, but after Bowie settled the suit, the local Border Patrol instituted a new policy, Operation Hold the Line. It's a policy that stations agents all along the Rio Grande River so that undocumented foreigners, including poor Juarez residents desperate for work, cannot cross into El Paso within its city limits. With agents massed at the river instead of driving through neighborhoods and campuses, civil rights groups have received fewer complaints about Border Patrol abuse within city limits. But in outlying communities at the edge of Operation Hold the Line's boundaries, it's the same old story. This woman lives in a poor neighborhood on the eastern outskirts of El Paso, where unscrupulous developers have sold lots without running water or sewer systems to people who are mostly immigrants from Mexico. During the past several years, many have started organizing to demand these necessities from the developers.
Empezaron a venir helicópteros, empezó a venir avionetas.
We started complaining to the owner for better services. Border Patrol helicopters started coming, and airplanes and their trucks. Before all this started, people used to be outside on nice days. Now, they hide. They're so afraid of immigration. The neighborhood is dead.
Well, I've seen them apprehending people on church grounds. I've seen them running after people on church grounds, to be sure.
Just west of El Paso, residents of Sunland Park, New Mexico, another impoverished border community, are having similar problems. Sunland Park's parish priest, Father Ed Herrera, has seen Border Patrol agents parked on church property, chasing border crossers into the sanctuary, and stopping local residents who are U.S. citizens. He calls it harassment, and he worries about its effect on the community. Ongoing Border Patrol abuse can be stopped. The part you play in creating solutions depends on who you are, a civilian or an agent. If you're a civilian in an immigrant community, not just on the border, but anywhere in the United States, know your rights. These rights apply whether you're a native-born U.S. citizen, a legal resident, or even if you're undocumented. What should you do if the Border Patrol detains you and tries to question or arrest you? Never lie. Stay calm and don't run. You have the right not to answer questions, but you should give your correct name. If you're arrested, you have the right to call a lawyer or a family member. If a deportation case is started against you, the agents must give you a list of free or low-cost lawyers. You should always talk to a lawyer before you sign any papers. You have the right to a hearing before a judge before you can be deported. You have the right to be released on bond. If your bond is too high, you have the right to ask a judge to lower it. If you're afraid to return to your home country, you have the right to apply for political asylum in the United States. If you've lived in the United States for at least 7 years, you may be able to prevent deportation. You should ask for a hearing. Important information. Identify agents by badge and license plate numbers, name or physical description. Identify the law enforcement agencies involved: Border Patrol, Customs Service, City Police, County Sheriff, National Guard, etc. Date, time, and location of the incident. Names and addresses of witnesses.
Get together as a group. You may not do it as an individual. You will do it as a group. Always voice your complaints to the people that you're complaining about. Give them the opportunity for redress. Give them the opportunity to say yes or no. Don't just run right off and say, I'm going to start a lawsuit. Confront them with the problems. And if they don't choose to listen, if they don't choose to agree, if they don't choose to change, get your groups together. Search out good young attorneys. Search out the media. Search out the public. And get going. Don't wait.
If you're an agent, you already know that the Border Patrol has rules about the right way to treat the people you come in contact with. Those rules are extensive, but they're very simply and easily summed up in the words of a Bowie plaintiff.
I would encourage you to treat people with respect. Because a person has a different skin color does not mean that they're less of a person. Because their language, first language is Spanish, does not mean that they are inferior. Because they come from a lower socioeconomic level society, does not mean that they don't have rights. Basically, I'd suggest that you treat them as you would like for people to treat you. Be respectful.
It's up to all of us to protect the rights and well-being of our communities. The challenge can be scary. For immigrants who fear retaliation and deportation, and for Border Patrol agents who may feel under pressure to cover up for fellow employees. But standing up for justice is an act that ultimately strengthens us, our children, and our country. El Paso took up the challenge. Now maybe the time has come in your community.
Con sus besitos me dio la vida, con sus miradas me hizo llorar. Ella es mi dicha y ella es mi anhelo, que da consuelo a mi corazón. Tengo el orgullo de ser el dueño de la más bella de esa región. Tiene sus ojos negras pestañas y su boquita como un rubí. En mi memoria llevo grabados todos los besos que yo le di. En San Antonio hay muchas flores